Before we begin, a quick question for you. If an entire galaxy told you a trap was unbreakable, would you believe it? And if one human quietly fixed it, what do you think would happen next? If that idea sparks curiosity, tap like, share your theory in the comments, and subscribe. You're going to want to follow where this goes. They called it a trap out of tradition, but tradition had sanded the word smooth until it meant comfort. The structure hung in vacuum like a perfectly solved equation, layered rings of gravitic plates humming with patient confidence. Every civilization that had ever expanded far enough learned its name early, usually whispered, always with relief. The predator was inside. Contained. Finished. Ilir Knox stood on the maintenance gantry with his hands tucked into a stained engineer's jacket, reading the system diagnostics like a man checking an old bridge before crossing. He was human, which meant everyone had already formed an opinion about him before he spoke. Harmless. Clever in short bursts. Good with tools and worse with consequences. The council had hired him because something in the trap was drifting out of tolerance. Not failing. Just subtly wrong. Energy curves misaligning by fractions small enough that no one wanted to attach their reputation to the discovery. Ilir specialized in those fractions. He listened to machines the way some people listen to storms. The predator sensed him the moment he arrived. It did not move. It did not test the field. It had learned long ago that thrashing taught enemies nothing worth knowing. Instead, it felt the rhythm change. The trap had always pulsed with fear. Layers of hostile logic, attack assumptions, kill contingencies stacked like teeth. Now there was something else threaded through the signal. Curiosity. Not from it, but from the one standing outside. "You're overcorrecting," Ilir murmured, mostly to himself as his wrist display scrolled with harmonics. "You built for terror, not load." Axwire counselor rose from the observation tier, mandibles clenching. "Human engineer, do not anthropomorphize the device. The trap has held for 12,000 cycles." "Yeah," Ilir said, eyes still on the numbers. "That's what worries me." He traced the fault to a lattice seam where three alien design philosophies overlapped but never truly agreed. Each species had added redundancy the way soldiers add armor after surviving a battle. Individually logical. Collectively fragile. The trap wasn't weak. It was tense. Always straining against itself. Inside the containment field, something massive shifted just enough to confirm it was awake. The predator had ended wars before most council species had discovered fire. Empires didn't defeat it. They exhausted themselves against it until someone desperate and clever enough built the trap. The galaxy remembered it as a triumph of unity, conveniently forgetting that unity born of fear still bends toward collapse. Ilir requested authorization to reroute power and rebalance the stress field. The council hesitated for exactly 3 seconds too long. Safety protocols bloomed red across the chamber. Every one of them predicted violence. Escape. Slaughter. Nothing in those protocols covered stillness. "Authorization granted," the High Arbiter said sharply. "Minimal adjustment only." Ilir smiled, thin and distracted. Minimal was rarely enough. He reached into the system gently, like setting a bone that had healed wrong decades ago. He dampened the emotional logic. Smoothed the oscillations. Let the structure settle into its own weight rather than fight itself. The trap exhaled. So did the predator. Sensors spiked, then stabilized. Power consumption dropped by 17%. The field sang clean and low, no longer shrill with anticipation of failure. Ilir leaned back against the rail, finally looking up at the thing everyone else refused to name aloud. He didn't see a mindless beast. He saw scars arranged with intention. A body engineered by survival to be devastating, yes, but also efficient. Patient. "Well," he said quietly, "that should hold." Inside the trap, the predator opened one eye. It did not glow. It did not threaten. It studied. Ilir felt it like pressure behind the sternum. Not fear. Recognition. Something old and evaluating had noticed him in return. He should have stepped back. He didn't. Engineers learned early that systems revealed their secrets only when you stayed long enough to listen. Behind him, alarms remained silent. That frightened the council more than any siren could have. "What did you change?" the Arbiter demanded. "Nothing essential," Ilir replied. "I fixed what was fighting itself." The predator curled, slowly, deliberately, and lowered its vast frame into a posture that looked uncomfortably like rest. Containment readings locked into perfect compliance. For the first time since its capture, the trap was not forcing submission. It was offering stability. Ilir's display chimed with a status message he had never seen associated with the predator before. Environmental equilibrium achieved. He swallowed, the weight of that phrase settling into him. Somewhere deep in the habitat ring, layered beyond matter and math, the predator's awareness lingered on the one being who had stopped trying to scare it. Ilyar Nox had not weakened the trap. He had made it better. And that was the moment the galaxy's greatest mistake quietly finished installing itself. Silence unsettled them more than alarms ever had. Ilyar remained on the gantry longer than protocol allowed, partly because no one told him to leave, and partly because the trap no longer felt like a place that punished patience. The field shimmered with a steadiness he trusted, a held note instead of a scream. Every sensor agreed. No pressure spikes. No aggression markers. The galaxy's deadliest organism lay motionless because it wanted to, not because it couldn't move. The council argued in layered frequencies behind transparent shields, careful not to let panic leak into the official record. They watched the predator as priests might watch a sleeping god, convinced that reverence alone kept it still. None of them noticed that it was watching back. The predator's attention was not broad. It had learned long ago that empires loved spectacle. If you gave them a monster, they reduced you to it. So it focused instead on the small anomaly standing where fear should have been. The human's posture was loose, not submissive. His gaze measured systems, not throats. That difference mattered. Ilyar finally broke the quiet by stepping closer to the boundary. He felt the field's resistance change, yielding then firming like a well-tuned gate. He knelt and set his palm against the ripple of containment, careful, reverent in a way he hadn't intended. "You don't like cages," he said, voice low. It wasn't a diplomatic statement. It was an engineering one. The predator shifted, a continental adjustment of muscle and mass that sent council aides scrambling. It did not strike the field. It altered its weight so the stresses redistributed exactly where the human had reinforced them. The trap accepted the load without complaint. Understanding flickered between them. Not speech. Not yet. Pattern recognition. The original trap had been built to punish movement. Density spikes. Directional retaliation. The humans fixed changed that equation. Movement was allowed now, so long as it respected the structure's limits. The predator had lived entire ages learning which limits mattered. A sensory pulse rolled outward. Not force. Information. The field translated it imperfectly into data, then gave up. Ilyar closed his eyes and listened the way he listened to failing engines. "You're testing tolerances," he murmured. "Seeing where it bends." The predator stilled again. Approval, if that word could apply to such a thing, resonated faintly through the lattice. The arbiter's voice cut across the chamber, too sharp. "Engineer, step away from the containment field." Ilyar straightened but didn't retreat. "It's asking questions." A murmur rippled through the council. Asking was a verb they had reserved for citizens, not catastrophes. The predator turned its head, slowly, deliberately, until one vast eye could see past the human and into the gathered leadership. The gaze carried no hunger. It carried bookkeeping. Centuries ago it had tried noise, terror. Those methods had produced weapons and martyrs. The trap had been different. The trap had been clever. What stood before it now was clever in another direction. Ilyar spoke again, carefully choosing honesty over caution. "You built this to break it psychologically. Fear feedback loops. Threat anticipation. It worked because you expected violence." The eye returned to him. "You never asked what it would do if it wasn't being attacked," Ilyar continued. "Some systems idle. Some optimize. Some wait." A command chime echoed as military subroutines quietly armed themselves. Ilyar felt it rather than saw it, the way pressure changes warned of an oncoming storm. The predator felt it too. The field rippled once as something vast coiled inside it, not to strike outward but to anchor. The trap, newly balanced, allowed that choice. Where once it would have resisted, now it supported. The predator lowered itself fully, folding limbs with ritual precision, and rested its head near the boundary where the human stood. Several counselors recoiled. Ilyar breathed out slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I thought." The predator was not preparing to escape. It was settling in. In its long memory, every prison had been uncomfortable by design. Discomfort forced timelines. It rushed decisions. This one no longer did. This one could be endured indefinitely. That made it useful. A tremor shivered through the habitat ring as the predator adjusted its internal mass. Readings plummeted. Energy draw stabilized at a level that defied predictive models. Containment integrity increasing, an automated voice announced, confused by its own certainty. The council stared at the numbers as if they were a foreign language. Ilyar's display flashed a private alert, piggybacked on sensor noise so subtly only another engineer would notice. It wasn't a warning. It was a map. Stress paths. Historical microfractures. A record of where the trap had almost failed across thousands of years. The predator was showing him the weak points. Not to exploit them. To document them. "You've been waiting," Elior whispered, awe threading into his voice despite his efforts. The eye closed halfway, an ancient approximation of assent. For the first time since its capture, the predator was no longer alone in its thoughts. Someone else finally spoke the language of structures and consequences. Someone who did not confuse fear with control. Behind them, the council made a decision they believed necessary and would later call inevitable. Weapons platforms began to slide into firing alignment. The predator opened its eye again. This time, it looked at the galaxy with something dangerously close to patience. The first weapon powered up without a sound. That was how Elior knew the decision had already been made. Militaries that trusted themselves liked silence. Noise suggested doubt. Around the containment array, orbital platforms rotated with ceremonial slowness, ancient hulls bristling with devices that had never been fired because no situation had ever been this desperate. The council framed the moment as caution. Elior recognized it as fear wearing armor. "Shut them down," he said, not loudly, not pleading. "You're pointing tools at a system that just stabilized." "The predator is adaptive," the arbiter replied. "Stability is a phase, not a promise." Elior glanced at the massive form inside the field. It had not risen. It had not tensed. Its attention had narrowed further, withdrawing from the chamber and settling into internal calculations that made the sensors whisper nonsense. "You're about to provoke the only variable that wasn't hostile," Elior said. "And you'll call it proof you were right." The failsafe primed. It was never intended to kill the predator directly. That fantasy had died generations ago. Instead, the failsafe was built to unravel the trap itself. Collapse the field, spike the local constants, turn the cage into a catastrophe lethal enough to solve what weapons could not. It relied on instability. On stress. On a system already halfway to failure. Elior watched the indicators rise, waited for the familiar tremor of protest from the lattice. Nothing happened. The predator lifted its head and exhaled slowly. The trap answered like a well-braced arch. Energy flowed where it was asked to go. No fractures bloomed. No retaliatory surges manifested. The human fix had done its quiet work too well. Failsafe progress, 90%. The arbiter's mandibles parted. "Why is it not responding?" "Because you stabilized it," Elior said, and then softer, "I did." The field collapsed anyway, not violently but incorrectly. The carefully arranged cascade found no purchase, so it spilled sideways into vacuum, draining along paths the predator had mapped centuries ago while pretending not to care. Light bent. Space flexed. Alarms finally screamed, offended by physics that no longer sought their permission. The predator stepped forward as the boundary unraveled around it. Not a lunge. Not a charge. A step placed exactly where the field thinned to irrelevance. Every weapon locked on automatically. Elior knew in that instant that if it wanted the chamber gone, if it wanted the ring pulverized and the planet beneath sterilized, none of them would survive the thought. That restraint had never been about capability. It had always been about priority. "Stop," Elior breathed uselessly as targeting matrices bloomed. The first shot never landed. A ripple passed through the firing platform's geometry, subtle as a rounding error. Power feeds desynchronized by fractions too small for manual override. Capacitors discharged into themselves. Guidance systems misaligned by microns that translated to kilometers at range. One by one, weapons fired precisely the wrong way, grazing empty orbits, searing nothing but silence. The predator moved again. This time it did not look at the weapons. It looked at the architecture that supported them. Load paths. Manufacturing seams. Assumptions made by engineers who believed size compensated for elegance. It exhaled, and the ring's outer struts began to sing under harmonics they were never tested against. "Structural compromise detected," the system announced, bewildered. Elior felt a hand, vast and impossibly gentle, brace against space near him as the predator shifted its mass to shield the gantry from collapse. The gesture was instinctive, uncalculated, and that frightened him more than deliberate destruction ever could. Ships died without being struck. Their orbits decayed as control algorithms chased ghosts the predator had taught them to see. Fleets tangled themselves into debris, victims of their own complexity. The galaxy had built taller and louder, not cleaner. The predator merely let engineering take its course. "Cease fire," the arbiter shrieked. "Cease fire now." There was no fire to cease. Only failures blossoming outward like cracks in ice. The Predator halted at the threshold of the chamber and turned, finally, to face the Council fully. Its presence bent light and certainty in equal measure. In its mind, the pattern resolved. This civilization, like so many before it, believed control was enforced by threat. They had mistaken fear for intelligence and noise for proof. The human had been different. He had touched the system where it hurt and made it stop hurting. Something like regret passed through the Predator, not for the destruction but for the lessons cost. It had hoped, briefly, that this galaxy might choose differently. It lowered its head toward Elior, a fraction of a degree that shifted gravity enough to be felt. The trap was gone. The prison irrelevant. What remained was a choice. The Council broadcast surrender across every channel they possessed, voices fraying as they offered concessions, territory, worship if it would just stop. The Predator did not acknowledge them. Instead, it looked down at the human engineer standing amid fractured symbols of galactic authority, staring back with a mixture of fear and furious understanding. The galaxy waited for the monster to declare dominion, and the Predator waited for the engineer to speak. Elior swallowed, aware that every remaining sensor, organic and mechanical, had narrowed onto the space between him and the Predator. He did not feel like a representative of his species or a negotiator for a wounded galaxy. He felt like an engineer standing beside a system that had reached a crossroads no one had diagrammed. "You don't need to do this," he said, choosing his words with the same care he'd used on the trap. "They don't learn fast. But they do learn eventually." The Predator considered him, and for the first time since its emergence, its attention sharpened to a single point. Communication unfolded not as sound but as weight and sequence, impressions threaded through gravity and rhythm. Elior's mind stumbled, then adapted, assembling meaning the way he assembled machines piece by piece. "You repaired what others weaponized." The certainty in it carried neither praise nor accusation. It was a statement of fact. "They built it to hurt you," Elior replied quietly. "I built it to hold." The Predator's awareness expanded, and Elior saw what it chose to show him. Not memories shaped like stories but structures of consequence. Civilizations arrayed as equations, variables introduced and removed. Species that escalated until collapse became inevitable. A few that paused, corrected, survived. A pattern emerged, stark in its simplicity. Builders endured. Conquerors burned themselves out. You are builders, the impression resolved, not hunters. That is why you are dangerous. Elior felt a chill that had nothing to do with vacuum. No one in the galaxy had ever called humanity dangerous with such perfect calm. The Predator's attention brushed past him then, radiating outward, tasting the systems nearby. It felt the human presence spreading like roots through unresolved problems. Distress signals flared at the edges of known space, innocuous on their own. Logistics issues. Power grid instabilities. Broken stations repaired with improvised parts. Always the same pattern. Humans arrived where things failed and left them functional. Not dominant. Functional. They mend what should be broken, the Predator conveyed. That alters trajectories. Council records began updating without authorization as encounter logs rewrote themselves under the weight of new data. Classification codes froze, then restructured. Humanity's threat profile climbed, not because of weapons or fleets, but because of something harder to counter. Existential engineering capability. The Predator turned back to Elior as if concluding an internal proof. "I do not rule. I correct." Around them, remnants of the ring drifted in slow arcs, stabilized by forces no longer violent but purposeful. The Predator adjusted gravitic flows with the precision of someone used to holding planets together through negligence rather than care. "I didn't set out to change the galaxy," Elior said. "I just fixed things." That, more than anything, seemed to settle the matter. The Predator lowered itself until its immense frame aligned with a dormant structure nearby, an ancient vessel disguised for millennia as debris. Plates unfolded, geometry blooming outward with patient inevitability. It was not a warship in the way the Council understood the term. It was a tool. One meant to move errors out of systems that refused to self-correct. "You will come," the Predator conveyed, not as a command, but as an assumption woven into the math of the moment. Elior hesitated, feeling the pull of gravity and responsibility in equal measure. Somewhere far away, Earth rotated without knowledge of how close its quiet species had come to becoming a footnote. "I can't leave everything behind." "You never do," came the reply. "You replicate." Elior laughed once, startled, a short bark of sound that echoed strangely in the reshaped space. "That might be the kindest thing anyone's ever said about us." The Predator's presence shifted, something like alignment completing. It extended a field-shaped corridor toward the human, calibrated to his mass and biology with disconcerting intimacy. It had learned him already. Behind them, the council tried again to interject, issuing demands and pleas that dissolved into static as the predator modulated the channels closed. "I won't help you destroy," Elior said firmly now. "If that's what this is." "Destruction is inefficient," the predator answered. "Deterrence endures. Correction persists." The corridor brightened, inviting without pressing. Elior stepped forward. As he crossed the threshold, a final transmission escaped into the broader galactic net, unblocked and unaltered. It was not a threat. It was an update. Humanity reclassified. Not conquerors. Not prey. A systemic variable. The ancient vessel powered fully for the first time in ages, not with the fury of awakening weapons, but with the restrained confidence of a problem finally allowed to be solved. Elior took a breath, feeling the strange calm that followed a completed repair. Somewhere behind him, the galaxy began recalculating. And somewhere ahead, the predator waited, not as a master, but as a partner who had waited a very long time for someone willing to fix things instead of breaking them. Elior stepped onto the observation deck of the ancient vessel, its surface humming with restrained energy. Outside, the debris of the old containment ring drifted silently, a ghostly testament to the galaxy's near mistake. He did not look for applause nor acknowledgement. The predator followed, massive yet unervingly silent, its presence a constant reminder that power need not roar to be felt. The galaxy had not forgiven. It had recalculated. Every council, fleet, and faction that had once mocked humanity now scrambled to understand how a single engineer had altered centuries of expectation. Reports poured in like fragmented starlight, civilian outposts stabilized, warships stranded harmlessly in orbit, trade routes cleared of malfunctioning hazards. Everywhere, human ingenuity had quietly corrected what armies had failed to manage. Elior felt the weight of it. Not pride. He had always preferred the quiet satisfaction of a problem fixed, but responsibility. The predator shifted beside him, sensing the same currents of consequence. Its focus was not conquest but calibration. Every action it took was a measure, a test, a correction of imbalance in the systems around them. "They won't leave it alone," Elior said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Some will try to hunt. Some will try to rebuild the trap. They will fail," the predator conveyed without words. It moved closer, vast claws adjusting energy conduits with meticulous precision. "They always fail when they measure against what they cannot control." Elior's mind raced through calculations he had never imagined performing. The predator was not a pet nor a weapon. It was a variable so extraordinary that to underestimate it or him would be fatal. And yet, it was loyal in a way that demanded not obedience but understanding. Humanity's danger was not brute force. It was adaptation, repair, and ingenuity. In the distance, the first fleets attempting to assert authority were neutralized without violence. They spun into orbiting debris fields, caught in gravitational harmonics subtly adjusted by the predator. Not a shot was fired. Not a single life ended. The galaxy's power structures had always assumed destruction was inevitable in chaos. Elior had taught them otherwise even unknowingly. He walked to the bridge console, running his hand over controls that still felt alien despite their intuitive design. "They'll want a reckoning," he said. "Someone to punish. Someone to account for this." The predator's gaze met his, unblinking. "Accountability is a tool, not a threat. Your species uses it wisely enough. That is why I remain." Elior smiled faintly, a brief release of tension he hadn't realized he'd carried. For millennia, the predator had judged empires by fear, violence, and obedience. Humans had survived by fixing what others destroyed, repairing what others ignored. That had always been dangerous. That was now the defining truth. A transmission pinged in. The council, beaten and bewildered, attempted negotiation. Elior ignored it, focusing instead on the patterns emerging across the galaxy. Broken systems were being repaired faster than any army could enforce compliance. Trade resumed. Communication stabilized. Even war-torn colonies began to rebuild on their own initiative, inspired by a species no longer underestimated. Elior exhaled and for the first time, allowed himself to acknowledge the enormity of what had been set into motion. The predator shifted to stand beside him, a guardian and observer, neither master nor servant. Together they had rewritten the rules of engagement for the galaxy, proving that intelligence and adaptability outweighed fear and firepower. "You know," Elior said, voice low, "people will want to write stories about this. They'll try to call it luck or coincidence." The predator's posture shifted slightly, a motion like a nod. Ilyar understood. They did not need stories. Their work existed in systems, in outcomes, in the subtle shifts that would ripple for generations. That was proof enough. Outside the vessel, the stars stretched into infinity. Humanity had become a quiet apex, not by strength, but by ingenuity and perseverance. The predator, once the galaxy's most feared hunter, now waited patiently on the outskirts of human settlements, dormant but alert, ensuring that the systems Ilyar repaired remained stable. Ilyar paused on the edge of a maintenance platform overlooking a human colony. He adjusted a small generator, hands steady. The predator rested nearby, its massive form casting shadows without menace. The two shared a rhythm, silent, efficient, and unspoken, a bond forged not by domination but by understanding. A soft hum of energy passed through the platform. The predator's presence shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though acknowledging that the galaxy had learned a lesson it had long intended to teach. Underestimate humans and the consequences would be inevitable. Not because of weapons. Not because of conquest. But because of the relentless, patient application of intellect and care. Ilyar looked at the predator and spoke softly, more to himself than to the beast. We fix what others can't. We survive where others fail. That's who we are. The predator exhaled, a vibration through the ground, a silent affirmation. Ilyar returned to work, tightening a panel with practiced precision. The galaxy had nearly destroyed itself through fear and arrogance. Humanity had repaired it instead. Somewhere beyond the stars, a new equilibrium began to take shape. Fleets reorganized, governments recalibrated, but none dared challenge the unspoken alliance that now existed between human ingenuity and apex strategy. The predator, a silent sentinel, watched over the settlements. Ilyar, the engineer who had rewritten the rules, continued to fix what could be broken, knowing that some errors were not meant to destroy but to teach. And in that quiet, deliberate rhythm, the galaxy understood. Nothing that humans touch remains broken for long, and nothing that hunts them sleeps forever. Ilyar tightened the last bolt and stepped back. The predator shifted beside him, massive, patient, waiting. The stars beyond reflected in their combined vigilance, a calm before a future shaped not by fear, but by those who dared to repair what others abandoned. The galaxy had learned the cost of underestimating one species, and the predator had found the one it could trust implicitly. In that silent harmony the story ended, but the consequences stretched outward, limitless, as the first human engineer walked away from the systems he had saved, leaving the apex predator awake, alert, and watching over the dawn of a new order.